Guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card using our Coming Up Poinsettias, Bare Tones background stamp, and our Pop-Up Poinsettia Dies. So I'm going to start off by white heat embossing this beautiful poinsettia cluster from our Coming Up Poinsettias, and I'm going to ink it up with some clear embossing ink first, and then I'm going to stamp it onto some watercolor paper. Then I'll pour on some white embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat gun, melting all of that beautiful powder. I'm using Canson XL 140-pound paper, and for my watercolors I'll be using Ken Oliver Color Burst. For the exact shades, I'm using alizarin crimson and lime green for the leaves. So I'm doing some wet and wet watercoloring. I started off by wetting the areas that I plan on painting with some clean water first, and then I dropped in a little bit of the alizarin crimson pigment into the inner portions of my poinsettia petals. After I applied my first round of pigment into the blooms, I'm going to start pulling that color out towards the edges of the petals. Once I'm satisfied with that first base layer of alizarin crimson, I'm going to go back and start adding more concentrated amounts of the color burst pigment into the inner portions of the petals. The thing that I love most about this color burst product is that you don't need all these different colors to create different gradients or shades of one color. So as you can see in that first bloom that I painted, you have a really dark red, and then you have the light pink as it blends out towards the edges of the petal. This was created using the one color burst, alizarin crimson, and this is why I really love this product. So I just applied the same technique to all three poinsettia blooms. To apply my paint or pigment, I'm using Pentel Aqua Brushes in the large and fine tip sizes. I'm using the fine tip brush to dip into the color burst powder, and then I'll use that to apply the pigment into my images, and then I'll take that larger brush to blend the color out. Next, I'm going to start painting my leaves and stems, and I'll be using lime green color bursts. And for the leaves, since the surface area of these images aren't that large, I'm not really taking too much care in coloring these smaller images. I'm just literally putting down pigment and then blending the color out to cover the images. Next, I'm going to take our new Bare Tones background stamp, and I'm going to white heat emboss this background onto some white cardstock. So I'm going to ink up the Bare Tones background stamp with some clear Versamark ink, which is a sticky embossing ink. I'm going to lay my panel over the stamp, and then I'm going to use my Speedball Baren tool to apply some even pressure to get a crisp image. Then I'm going to pour on some white embossing powder and melt all of that powder with my heat gun. I'm going to set this embossed panel aside and then stamp the same background stamp. However, I'm going to be using our crystal pewter dye ink. So I'm just going to ink the stamp up really well with my gray ink and then stamp my white panel. I made two Bare Tones panels because the white heat embossed panel is going to go over the gray Bare Tones panel. But before I actually do any layering, I'm going to take the first and third dies in our double stitch rectangles large die collection, and I'm just going to die cut my white heat embossed panel. The largest die will add stitching to the edges of my A2 panel, and then that third die will create a nice window. I set that inner negative piece aside for a future project. Then I took the coordinating die for our Coming Up Poinsettias and I die cut the cluster image. Next, I took my heat embossed border and I popped it up over my gray stamped Bare Tones panel. Then I trimmed a little bit of the stem or the base of the stem of my poinsettia cluster, and then I created my Merry Christmas sentiment, which I stamped in our Smoky Quartz dye ink. I just stamped it onto some white cardstock, and then I trimmed the sentiment out, and I made a little slant at the end, creating a little bit of a sentiment banner and giving that banner interest. Then I tucked my poinsettia cluster into the border, and then I popped up that Merry Christmas sentiment strip right over the cluster, and it kind of overlapped with the border, which was okay. So I made sure to use a double layer foam tape for my sentiment so that it's popped up a little bit more over all the other elements such as the cluster and the border. Next, I just added some of our silver metallic sequins to finish off with the embellishment of the face of my card. After I finish with my sequins, I'm going to adhere my finished card front onto a side folding A2 card base. Then I'll start creating the pop-up poinsettia for the inside of my card. Our pop-up poinsettia consists of several dies that you can put together and create a beautiful pop-up element inside your card. I started off by die cutting all the elements except for the centers onto some red paper. I'm not using cardstock for the petals because you want to use something that's a little lighter weight. Then for the leaves or foliage portion of my poinsettia, I'm just going to create my own glitter paper using our Glossy Fine Gold Glitter Adhesive paper, which I adhered onto some regular cardstock. And since this will act as the leaves for my poinsettia, and they're going to be adhered right onto the card base, so you can use cardstock for the leaves. So I took the largest petal die and the two centers, and I die cut these pieces using my homemade gold glitter cardstock. Next, I'm going to start assembling my poinsettia. You want to begin assembling your pop-up poinsettia by identifying the largest petal, and to do so, line up the two tabs for both the first and second largest petals, and then whichever petal is longer, you're going to see that it overlaps just a little bit more. That's the largest one. So you want to start off by using that one first and adhering that into your card base first. So you want to bend the tabs at the scored line towards you and then put some glue at the end tab and just adhere the end tab and the end of the petal together. Then you're just going to apply some additional glue on the two inner tabs, and you're going to glue this petal ring into your card base, and you want to make sure the two tabs are facing each other and that they run parallel to the score line of your card base. And you're going to repeat the process for the rest of your petals. So now I'm taking the second petal and I'm going to create the petal ring. But before I do so, you can see that I folded the tabs and some of the petals so that you have a little bit more definition in the actual bloom. After I adhered the petal ring into my card base, I just close my card base to make sure that they're adhered nicely into my card. And I'm going to repeat the process for the rest of the petals. When you're assembling any of our pop-up die cuts into your cards, you want to make sure that you either use some quick drying liquid adhesive or a tape runner or some score tape. Next, I'm just going to start adhering or assembling the two smaller petals. So I took the larger of the smaller petals and I'm going to fold up the tabs, the inner tabs, and then I'm going to glue the end tab to the opposite end of the petal, and then I'm just going to adhere that right to the center of my partially assembled pop-up poinsettia. Then I'm going to repeat the process for the smallest petals. And this is the last petal that I'll add to my poinsettias. The tabs are kind of small, but if you're using liquid glue, you won't have an issue with adhering them into your poinsettia. Next, I'll take the larger of the center elements and I'll fold it in half, apply some glue at the folded outer portion of the center, and then I'll just adhere it right into my poinsettia, and then I'll do the same thing with the smaller of my centers. Then I'm going to take that other glitter petal that I die cut earlier from our gold glitter cardstock, and I cut it in half and I applied some glue to the tabs and the ends, and I just tucked them into or behind my poinsettia, completing my pop-up element. And my card is now complete. Check out all of this texture created from the white heat embossed bare tones, and it's such a lovely contrast against the gray stamped bare tones. And the red and gold combination of the pop-up poinsettia inside the card is just a really lovely touch. So I hope you all enjoyed today's project and video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a weekly basis. So thanks so much for stopping by. I'll see you next time.